Benjamin Cross's son had been paralyzed and autistic since birth, the sole beneficiary of a $40 million trust fund designated specifically for the care of this disabled child. But on her third day of work, Naomi Wright saw something impossible. The boy's toes moved. Not a tremor, not a spasm, a deliberate response to the music box she'd been dusting. So when Naomi checked his morning medication, she paid closer attention to the drug names, something a black maid had no business caring about. But her nursing school knowledge surfaced. This combination of drugs was enough to suppress motor function to near zero, not medications meant to heal. She confronted the private nurse, who smiled coldly and said 6 words that changed everything. "Mr. Cross needs him this way." The penthouse occupied the entire 68th floor of the Sterling Tower in Manhattan. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city like a painting, but Naomi Wright barely noticed the view on her first morning. She was too focused on not dropping the imported crystal vase she was dusting, too aware of the cameras tracking her movements through rooms that cost more than her entire neighborhood back in Detroit. She had arrived in New York 3 months ago with a nursing degree she couldn't use and a student visa that had expired 2 weeks after she'd failed her licensing exam for the 3rd time. Test anxiety, her advisor had called it. Naomi called it what it was. Fear that she wasn't good enough, that she'd never be good enough, that coming to America had been a mistake her family couldn't afford. The maid position paid cash, no questions asked, and came with a small room in the service quarters. It wasn't nursing, but it was survival. The agency had briefed her about the household. Benjamin Cross, 38, tech billionaire who'd made his fortune in artificial intelligence and machine learning. His company, Cross Tech Industries, had revolutionized data processing and now held contracts with half the Fortune 500. He was worth $3.7 billion according to the latest Forbes estimate. He lived alone except for his son and a rotating staff who never lasted more than 6 months. The son was the reason for the high turnover, they'd warned her. 9-year-old Liam Cross, born with severe autism and complete paralysis from the neck down. The boy required round-the-clock care, couldn't speak, couldn't move, existed in a state the previous maids had described as haunting. Some had quit after a single day. Others lasted weeks before the weight of caring for a child trapped in his own body became too much to bear. Naomi had nodded through the briefing, thinking of her little brother back home, who'd been born with cerebral palsy. She knew what it meant to love someone the world had written off. She could handle this. The penthouse was divided into distinct zones. The public areas, living room, dining room, kitchen, gleamed with unused perfection. Then there was Benjamin Cross's private wing, strictly off limits. And finally, Liam's suite, a converted section that functioned as bedroom, therapy room, and medical facility all in one. This was where Naomi spent most of her time, cleaning around the specialized equipment, the modified bed, the monitors that beeped softly through the day and night. Liam himself was small for 9 years old, his body thin and motionless beneath expensive sheets. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at something beyond the ceiling. Dark hair fell across his forehead. He had his father's sharp features, but where Benjamin Cross's face was hard with calculated control, Liam's held only absence. Patricia Meadows, the private nurse, was a woman in her late 50s with steel-grey hair and a manner that suggested she'd seen everything and been impressed by none of it. She administered Liam's medications with mechanical efficiency, adjusted his position every 2 hours to prevent bed sores, and spoke to him in the flat tone people use when they don't expect a response. "Don't bother talking to him," Patricia had told Naomi on the first day. "He can't understand you. Just clean around him and move on." But Naomi couldn't help herself. As she dusted the shelves lined with toys that had never been played with, she hummed. Old gospel songs her grandmother had sung, melodies that had filled their small church back home. Music had always soothed her brother during his worst moments. Maybe it would bring Liam some comfort too, even if he couldn't show it. On the third morning, Naomi was cleaning near the antique music box on Liam's dresser. It was a beautiful thing, hand-carved wood inlaid with mother-of-pearl, the kind of object that cost more than most people's cars. She'd been instructed never to open it, but as she dusted around it, her hand slipped. The lid popped open, and a delicate melody began to play. Tchaikovsky, she thought, though she wasn't sure. She moved to close it, afraid she'd broken something irreplaceable, when she noticed movement in her peripheral vision. Her head snapped toward the bed. Liam's right foot, barely visible beneath the sheets, had shifted. Not much, just a few degrees, toes curling slightly as if reaching toward the sound. Naomi froze. Paralyzed children didn't move. That was the definition of paralysis. But she'd seen it. She was certain. She stood perfectly still, watching, and after a moment it happened again. A small flex of the toes, deliberate and controlled, following the rhythm of the music. Her nursing training kicked in before conscious thought could catch up. She approached the bed slowly, observing. Liam's eyes hadn't changed, still vacant and distant, but his foot continued those tiny movements. When the music box wound down and fell silent, the movements stopped. Naomi's heart was racing. She looked toward the door, confirming Patricia was still in the kitchen preparing Liam's lunch. Then she returned to the music box and opened it again. The melody resumed. Within seconds, Liam's toes began their subtle dance. This wasn't possible. Unless it was. For the rest of the day, Naomi moved through her duties in a daze, her mind spinning through possibilities. That evening, she did something she'd been specifically instructed not to do. She entered Liam's suite after Patricia had left for the night and examined the medication chart that hung on the wall near his bed. The list was extensive. Naomi recognized some of the names from her nursing courses. Baclofen for muscle spasticity, diazepam for anxiety. But then there were others, combinations that made her pause. Tizanidine, another muscle relaxant. Dantrolene, vecuronium bromide in low doses. That one made her blood run cold. It was a paralytic agent, the kind used during surgery to prevent movement. She pulled out her phone and started searching, keeping her voice low as she photographed the medication labels. The more she researched, the clearer it became. These weren't medications to treat paralysis. They were medications to cause it, to maintain it, to ensure that any motor function remained completely suppressed. The sound of footsteps in the hallway sent Naomi scrambling back to her duties. She barely made it to the linen closet before Patricia appeared, making her final rounds before heading to her own quarters in the building next door. Naomi barely slept that night. She kept seeing those tiny movements, kept thinking about the medications, kept asking herself what kind of father would do this to his own child, because that was the only explanation that made sense. Benjamin Cross was keeping his son paralyzed, intentionally, systematically, for 9 years. But why? The next morning, Naomi arrived early. She needed to understand more about this family, about the situation she'd stumbled into. The other staff members were carefully neutral when asked about the Cross family, clearly trained not to gossip. But the building's doorman, an older man named James who'd worked there for 20 years, was more talkative. "Sad situation," he said, shaking his head. "Mr. Cross's sister Elizabeth, she died giving birth to that boy. Complications, they said. She wasn't married, no father in the picture. Mr. Cross took the baby in, raised him as his own. But the kid was born with problems, you know? Never moved, never made a sound. Doctors said it was one of those tragedies, rare genetic condition, nothing to be done." "He adopted Liam legally?" Naomi asked carefully. "Oh yes, full adoption. Spared no expense either. Best doctors, best equipment, that trust fund to make sure the boy's taken care of for life. Whatever you say about Benjamin Cross, he loves that kid. Dedicated his whole life to him." Naomi thanked James and rode the elevator up. her mind working through this new information. Elizabeth Cross had died 9 years ago. Benjamin had adopted his nephew, claimed the boy was paralyzed from birth, and set up a massive trust fund for his care. A trust fund that would presumably only remain valid as long as Liam remained disabled. She needed proof. Real proof, not just suspicious medications and a brief glimpse of moving toes. That afternoon, while Patricia took her lunch break and Benjamin was at his office downtown, Naomi made her decision. She slipped into Benjamin's private study, knowing she was risking everything, knowing this could end with her not just fired, but arrested. The study was exactly what she expected. Dark wood, leather furniture, walls lined with books that looked expensive but unread. His desk was massive and surprisingly cluttered for such a controlled man. Naomi searched quickly, looking for anything related to Liam's medical history. She found it in a locked drawer that yielded easily to a letter opener. A thick file marked with Liam's name and the logo of Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. She flipped through quickly, photographing pages with her phone. Birth certificate listing Elizabeth Cross as mother, father unknown. Adoption papers dated 3 weeks after birth. And then, buried in the middle of the file, a medical report from Liam's first neurologist, Dr. Richard Blake. The report was dated 5 years ago, when Liam was 4. Dr. Blake had conducted a comprehensive neurological examination. Naomi's hands shook as she read his conclusions. Patient demonstrates full motor function capability during examination. Responds to stimuli with appropriate movement of all extremities. Cognitive assessment limited due to autism spectrum disorder, but physical paralysis diagnosis cannot be confirmed. Recommend immediate cessation of muscle relaxant medications and comprehensive physical therapy evaluation. There was a note clipped to the report in different handwriting. Dr. Blake's services no longer required. Find someone more understanding of Liam's true condition. Naomi photographed everything, her breath coming in short gasps. She was holding evidence of medical fraud, child abuse, false imprisonment. This was bigger than she'd imagined, and she had no idea what to do with it. The sound of the elevator chiming in the hallway sent panic shooting through her. She shoved the file back into the drawer, pushed it closed, and rushed out of the study. She made it to the kitchen just as Benjamin Cross entered the penthouse. He was a striking man in person, tall and lean with dark hair silvering at the temples. He wore his wealth casually, $1,000 suits that looked comfortable rather than showy, a watch that cost more than most cars, but was understated enough that you had to know watches to recognize its value. His eyes were gray and sharp, the kind of eyes that saw everything and revealed nothing. "You're the new maid," he said, and it wasn't a question. "Yes, sir. Naomi Wright." He studied her for a moment, and Naomi forced herself to meet his gaze without flinching. "Patricia tells me you've been singing to my son." "I'm sorry, sir. I won't if it bothers you." "It doesn't bother me." His expression was unreadable. "Nothing reaches him, but if it makes your work easier, continue." He moved past her toward his study, and Naomi's heart nearly stopped. But he paused at the door, turning back. "How long have you been in the country, Miss Wright?" The question was casual, but Naomi heard the threat underneath. 3 months, sir. "And your visa status?" "I'm working on it, sir." The lie came easily, born of practice. Benjamin nodded slowly. "I see. Well, we all do what we must to survive, don't we?" He entered his study and closed the door. Naomi leaned against the kitchen counter, legs shaking. He knew, or suspected. That question about her visa wasn't random. It was a warning. "Stay in line, or I'll have you deported." That evening, after Patricia had administered Liam's medications and left for the night, Naomi returned to his suite. She had to try something, had to confirm what she suspected. She opened the music box and let the melody play. This time, she didn't just watch his toes. She observed his entire body with the careful attention she'd been trained to use. There, a slight tension in his shoulders, a minute shift in his breathing pattern, and yes, those toes curling and flexing in time with the music. Liam wasn't completely unresponsive. He was trapped, locked inside a body that had been chemically paralyzed for his entire life. "I see you," Naomi whispered, moving closer to the bed. "I see you, Liam. I know you're in there." For just a second, she could have sworn his eyes focused, could have sworn he looked directly at her with an awareness that shattered the vacant expression. But then it was gone, and she was left wondering if she'd imagined it. The next morning, Naomi made a decision that would change everything. She confronted Patricia in the medication room, where the nurse was preparing Liam's morning doses. "Those aren't therapeutic medications," Naomi said quietly. "They're paralytic agents." Patricia's hand stilled on the pill bottles. When she turned, her smile was cold and knowing. "And what would a maid know about medications?" "I was a nursing student. I know what vecuronium does. I know what this combination does. You're keeping him paralyzed." "I'm following doctor's orders." "Which doctor?" "Because the first neurologist said there was nothing wrong with him." Patricia's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "Dr. Blake was mistaken. Liam's current physicians have confirmed his diagnosis. Physicians that Benjamin Cross pays." "Mr. Cross," Patricia corrected sharply, "is a devoted father doing everything possible for a severely disabled child. If you're suggesting otherwise, you should be very careful. False accusations against a man of his standing can have serious consequences, especially for someone in your precarious situation." There it was again, the threat wrapped in silk. Naomi felt anger rising in her chest, hot and righteous. "That boy can move. I've seen it. You've seen muscle spasms, common in paralytic conditions. If you continue making these accusations, I'll have to inform Mr. Cross that you're not suitable for this position." Patricia stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He's been very generous in not asking too many questions about your background, Miss Wright. I'd hate for him to start getting curious." Naomi left the medication room with her hands clenched into fists. She was trapped. No legal status, no proof anyone would believe. And now, two people who knew exactly how to keep her silent. But every time she looked at Liam, lying motionless in that bed, she thought about her brother. She thought about all the people who'd underestimated him, who'd assumed disability meant lack of worth. She couldn't walk away. She wouldn't. Over the next week, Naomi gathered more evidence. She recorded Patricia administering the medications. She documented the dosages. She took more photos of the medical files she'd found, this time being careful to return everything exactly as she'd found it. She researched the trust fund structure and discovered something interesting. The $40 million wasn't just for Liam's care. It was structured so that Benjamin retained control as guardian, with significant management fees. If Liam were ever declared competent or capable, control would shift. The money would shift. But it was more than that, Naomi realized as she dug deeper into public records at the library. Elizabeth Cross had come from old money, family wealth that dwarfed even Benjamin's tech fortune. Her will had been specific. Everything she owned went to her son, held in trust until he turned 18. But if he were declared permanently incapacitated, her brother Benjamin would maintain guardianship indefinitely. The management fees alone amounted to millions per year. Naomi had her motive. Benjamin Cross was keeping his nephew paralyzed to maintain control of a massive fortune. But she still needed a way to expose it that wouldn't result in her own destruction. The answer came from an unexpected source. 2 weeks into her employment, a man appeared at the penthouse. He was younger than Benjamin, maybe early 30s, with the casual confidence of inherited wealth. Patricia introduced him as William Bradford, the family attorney. He spent an hour in Benjamin's study, and when he emerged, Naomi caught fragments of their conversation. "The annual review is next month," William was saying. "The trustees will want updated medical evaluations. They're starting to ask questions about why Liam hasn't progressed at all in 9 years. He has severe disabilities," Benjamin replied smoothly. "There is no progress to be made." "I understand that. But perhaps it would help to bring in a new specialist, someone prestigious who can provide fresh documentation." After William left, Naomi made another risky decision. She followed him. She caught him in the lobby, her heart pounding as she approached. "Mr. Bradford?" He turned, surprised. "Yes?" "I'm Naomi Wright. I work for Mr. Cross. I need to speak with you about Liam." His expression became guarded. "If you have concerns about your employment, you should address them with, 'Liam isn't paralyzed,'" Naomi interrupted. "He's being kept that way with medications. I have proof." William Bradford stared at her for a long moment. Then he glanced around the busy lobby and lowered his voice. "That's a serious accusation. I have photographs, medical records, Dr. Blake's original evaluation. I know about the trust fund." Something changed in his face. "Not here. There's a coffee shop 2 blocks east. Meet me there in 20 minutes. Naomi spent those 20 minutes terrified she'd made a catastrophic mistake. But when she sat down across from William Bradford in a quiet corner booth, his first words gave her hope. "I've had suspicions for years," he admitted. "But Benjamin is powerful and careful. The trustees are old friends of his. Without concrete proof." Naomi pulled out her phone and showed him everything. The photographs of medications, the recorded video of Patricia administering them, the pictures of Dr. Blake's original report. As William scrolled through, his expression grew darker. "My God," he whispered. "This is monstrous. Can you help him? If this goes public, Benjamin will destroy you. You understand that? He has the make your life hell. And if your visa situation is what I suspect—" "I know," Naomi said quietly. "But that little boy has been a prisoner his entire life. Someone has to speak for him." William was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I'll contact the Board of Trustees directly. With this evidence, we can trigger an emergency review. But we need to move carefully. Benjamin has Patricia completely loyal to him, and she'll cover up or destroy evidence if she suspects anything." "What do I do?" "Keep working. Act normal. Document everything you can. I'll arrange for an independent medical team to examine Liam, but I need 2 weeks to put everything in place. Can you hold out that long?" Naomi nodded, though her stomach twisted with anxiety. 2 weeks of living under Benjamin Cross's roof, knowing what she knew, pretending everything was normal. Those 2 weeks were the longest of Naomi's life. She cleaned, she cooked, she hummed her gospel songs to Liam when Patricia wasn't listening, and she watched Benjamin Cross with new eyes, trying to understand what would drive a man to do this to a child. She got her answer late one night when she heard sounds from Benjamin's study. Crying, harsh, broken sobbing that seemed torn from somewhere deep and painful. Naomi crept closer to the door and heard his voice, thick with anguish. "I can't lose him, Elizabeth. I can't. You left him with me. You said I was all he had. If he leaves me, if he grows up and doesn't need me anymore—" The words dissolved into more sobbing. Naomi backed away, her mind reeling. This wasn't about money at all. Or not just about money. Benjamin Cross was keeping his nephew paralyzed out of a twisted, desperate love. He'd lost his sister, and convinced himself that if Liam remained helpless, remained dependent, he'd never have to lose him too. The trust fund, the control, the money. Those were just convenient justifications for something darker. A need to be needed. A refusal to let go. It didn't make what he was doing any less monstrous, but it made him human in a way Naomi hadn't expected. Not a villain, but a man so broken by grief that he'd built a prison and called it love. On the 14th day, William Bradford returned with 3 people: Dr. Sarah Klein, a renowned pediatric neurologist; Dr. James Patterson, a specialist in neuromuscular disorders; and Margaret Wells, the lead trustee of Elizabeth Cross's estate. They arrived without warning, with a court order that Benjamin's lawyers couldn't block. Patricia tried to interfere, but Margaret Wells shut her down with a single icy sentence. "You are terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you out." Naomi watched from the doorway as the medical team examined Liam. They drew blood, conducted reflex tests, reviewed his current medications. Benjamin stood in the corner, his face carved from stone, saying nothing. When Dr. Klein asked Patricia to bring the medication records, William produced the photographs Naomi had taken instead. "These medications," Dr. Klein said slowly, "constitute a systematic regime of chemical paralysis. This child has been deliberately incapacitated." "My nephew has severe disabilities," Benjamin said, his voice empty. "I've done everything." "You've done this," Dr. Patterson interrupted, holding up the syringe of vecuronium. "This isn't treatment, this is abuse." The examination took 3 hours. When it was done, Dr. Klein turned to Benjamin with barely controlled fury. "We're admitting Liam to the hospital immediately. It will take weeks to safely withdraw these medications from his system. With proper therapy, I believe he has the potential for significant motor function recovery. What you've done to this child—" She shook her head, too angry to finish. As the paramedics prepared to transport Liam, Benjamin finally moved. He went to his nephew's bedside and touched his hand with a tenderness that broke Naomi's heart. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I was so afraid of losing you like I lost her. But I can see now. I already lost you. I just wouldn't admit it." For the first time in Naomi's presence, Liam's eyes focused, really focused. He looked at his uncle, and though he couldn't speak, couldn't move more than those tiny increments, something passed between them. Forgiveness, maybe, or just recognition of shared pain. The police arrived shortly after the ambulance left. Benjamin Cross was arrested on charges of child abuse, fraud, and false imprisonment. The news cycle devoured the story for weeks. Tech billionaire secretly keeps nephew paralyzed for years. The sensational headlines wrote themselves. Naomi gave her statement to the prosecutors, testified before the grand jury, and waited for Benjamin's lawyers to destroy her, as William had warned. But the attack never came. Benjamin Cross pleaded guilty to all charges, refusing to fight. In his allocution, he spoke about grief, about fear, about love twisted into something unrecognizable. "I told myself I was protecting him," he said in court. "But I was only protecting myself from the pain of letting go. Liam deserved to grow, to live, to become whoever he was meant to be. I stole that from him, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make amends." He was sentenced to 8 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 5. The trust fund was restructured, with independent trustees and no family control. And Liam began the long journey of recovery. Naomi stayed in New York through the trial, living in a small apartment that William helped her find. The publicity from the case attracted the attention of immigration attorneys who took her case pro bono. Within 6 months, she had legal status. Within a year, she'd passed her nursing boards and was working at Columbia Presbyterian in the pediatric rehabilitation ward. She visited Liam twice a week. The first few months were agonizing as his body slowly remembered how to move. The muscle wasting was severe. The neurological pathways had been suppressed for so long that rebuilding them took extraordinary effort. But Liam fought. With physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, and more determination than anyone had believed he possessed, he fought his way back. A year after his rescue, Liam took his first steps. Hesitant, shaky, supported by parallel bars and 2 therapists, but steps nonetheless. Naomi was there, watching from the observation window with tears streaming down her face. When he looked up and saw her, he smiled. It was a small thing, just a slight curve of his lips, but it was his smile. Earned and real and beautiful. His autism remained. He would always process the world differently, would always need support and understanding. But he was no longer a prisoner. He attended a special school where teachers recognized his intelligence and worked with his differences rather than around them. He learned to communicate through a tablet when speech was too difficult. He made friends. On the 2nd anniversary of his admission to the hospital, Liam asked to visit his uncle. Benjamin had been transferred to a minimum security facility, and with the court's permission, Liam made the trip. Naomi accompanied him, uncertain what to expect. Benjamin looked older, grayer, but there was something different in his eyes, a clarity that had been missing before. When Liam entered the visiting room, Benjamin's face crumpled. "I'm so sorry," he said, the words barely audible. "Liam, I'm so sorry." Liam crossed the room slowly, still unsteady on his feet, and sat down across from his uncle. He picked up his tablet and typed carefully. The mechanical voice read his words aloud. "I forgive you. You were scared. I understand being scared." Benjamin broke down completely then, sobbing into his hands. And Liam reached across the table, his hand shaking with the effort, and touched his uncle's arm. It was a gesture of comfort, of connection, of a love that had survived even the worst kind of imprisonment. Naomi watched from the corner, giving them privacy, and thought about all the cages people built in the name of love. Some were made of bars and locks, but the most insidious were made of fear, of need, of the desperate human impulse to hold tight to what we're terrified of losing. Benjamin Cross had built his cage from medication and lies, had convinced himself he was protecting Liam, when really he was protecting himself from the unbearable pain of grief. He'd spent 9 years telling himself a story about devotion while denying his nephew the fundamental right to exist fully in the world. But cages could be broken, bodies could heal, people could learn to let go. 3 years after that first music box moment, Naomi attended Liam's 12th birthday party at his new group home. He was surrounded by friends and therapists, his face bright with genuine joy as he tried to blow out his candles. It took several attempts, his breath control still imperfect, but when he finally succeeded, the room erupted in cheers. Later, as the party wound down, Liam found Naomi on the porch. He sat beside her, his movements still careful but increasingly confident, and typed on his tablet. "Thank you for seeing me." "You were always there," Naomi said. "I just noticed." "No," Liam typed. "I was hiding, scared of what I might be if I could move, scared of disappointing everyone. You made me want to be brave." Naomi felt tears pricking her eyes. "You're the bravest person I know." Liam smiled and leaned against her shoulder. Below them, the city stretched out in lights, full of possibility and pain, of prisons people built and bridges people crossed. Somewhere in a facility upstate, Benjamin Cross was learning to live with what he'd done, seeking his own kind of freedom. And here, in this moment, a boy who'd spent his childhood paralyzed was choosing to move forward, one step at a time. Sometimes the most powerful prisons are the ones built from love gone wrong, but sometimes, with courage and grace, those chains can break. And when they do, when people finally choose freedom over fear, the world opens up in ways that seem impossible until they're real. Naomi looked at Liam, at his bright eyes and determined expression, and knew that this was what nursing had always meant to her, not just healing bodies, but bearing witness to the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit. She'd come to America chasing a dream, had stumbled into a nightmare, and found her purpose in the eyes of a boy who'd been told he'd never move. She'd seen him, and in seeing him, she'd helped him see himself. That, she thought, was worth everything. The fear, the risk, the uncertainty of those early months when she'd been ready to walk away. Some things were worth fighting for. Some people deserved to be free. And sometimes the most ordinary courage, a maid noticing what she wasn't supposed to see, asking questions she wasn't supposed to ask, could change everything. The music box sat on the table inside, its melody silent now. But Naomi would always remember that first twist of the key, that first impossible movement of a small boy's toes, and the question that changed both their lives. What if he's still in there? He had been. He was. He always would be. And now, finally, he was free.